Hello, my name is Sergey Yazvenko. I'm an ecologist from Canada. And today I'm going to talk about the strategy Uzbekistan 2030, goal number 68, the expansion of forested area in Uzbekistan. Why do you even have to listen to me? Well, I have a lot of experience with studying forests, studying all kinds of ecosystems, studying mountains. Here is the map of sites that I compiled, where you can see the red dots. These are the dots. These are the areas where I worked personally. The blue dots are the dots where I didn't visit personally. But I studied the literature, studied the data from these sites, and then analyzed the data, compiled them, prepared papers or reports. So you can see that I do have some credentials to talk about the mountain forests and the forests in more general terms. Not only I studied forests, but I also did a lot of projects restoring forest ecosystems, specifically mountain forest ecosystem. When I was a student and I was working on my master's thesis, I was working in the Caucasus, in the mountains, in the forests. There's a big, huge natural reserve there called Teberda Natural Reserve, where pretty much all the human activity is not allowed. No logging, no grazing, virtually nothing. People live there, but they leave the forests and the whole ecosystem intact. So I did collect my material there. And I'm walking through that forest. This is that forest. I visited it again this year, 40 years later. And it's a wonderful forest, old growth, very lush, very rich, very diverse. And then I move into an adjacent gorge, which is not a natural reserve, which was used by the humans. Here is what I see there. And it was a shock. Like I was in the big forest before, and now I'm in this. And what's this? No forest, virtually no trees, no even shrubs. It's all like a lawn, very, very little vegetation there. It's just a little grass that's like 5 to 10 centimeters long. Why? What happened to this? To this other gorge, which is the same climate, the same situation, the same environment as Teberda Natural Reserve. Simple. People live there, they cut the forest probably centuries ago, and they graze the animals there, the cows and sheep and goats. And that's what happens to the forested area in the mountains when the people cut the forest and graze the animals. The forest does not regenerate, of course. The animals are trampling seedlings of forest or forest trees. They're eating them because they're still young and juicy, and so they prevent the forest from coming back, right? But you would say, so what? I mean, who cares? It's still nice, still green, still looks beautiful. No, it's not. I mean, it looks okay still, but it's not good because this situation is not sustainable. When people put the grazing animals to this environment, sooner or later it will be what's called overgrazed, meaning grazed too much. Why is that? Because people tend to overexploit the resource that doesn't cost them money. It's a free resource. These pastures are free, right, for everyone. Well, at least traditionally they were free. So people tend to put more animals, more cows, more sheep than this ecosystem can sustain without being degraded. And then what happens? This is what happens. That's the next stage. You can see these lines of nude slope with no vegetation. These are the trails of these grazing animals. The animals are walking along the slope and eating, and when they trample the vegetation doesn't come back. So you can see these trails that are devoid of vegetation, that are nude. And these trails become the focal points, the starting points of erosion. And erosion is the killer of the mountain ecosystems. Erosion is the process when the loose material is moving because of gravity. Gravity is pulling it down, and it's moving by water or air, but usually by water, from the top, from the slopes, down slope, and into the streams, and all the way to the Aral Sea. You can see these rocks in downslope. These rocks used to be on the slope. They just fell down because of the erosion, because nothing was holding them together. Okay? So you cut the forest, you graze the animals on this pasture, and then the erosion starts really accelerating. And that's bad. What's the next stage? This. In one of the neighboring countries, about 2 years ago, there were unusually big rains in the mountains. It's a monsoon climate. And the cost of these big rains was the catastrophic flood in the downstream areas where a lot of people, millions of people live. And the monetary cost of this flood was $15 billion damage, 2,000 lives lost, people killed by this roaring water, and about 20 million houses damaged or destroyed. So it's a huge catastrophe. That is the price people pay when they cut the forests in the mountains. How does it work? Why you cut the forests far away somewhere, and then thousands of kilometers downstream, you suffer something like this. Billions of dollars damage, lives lost, homes destroyed. This is how it works. This is Uzbekistan. And you can see that on the southeast of Uzbekistan, there's this relatively small area of mountains, right? And these mountains were forested. Why is it important? Because it's in these mountains that all the water that we drink originates. Basically, all the water that people of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, a lot of people of Kazakhstan drink, all this water is in these three big rivers. Amu Darya, the biggest, Sirdarya, and then smaller river Zerafshan, which is still very, very important, because you can see Samarkand, Navoi, and Bukhara sit on this relatively small but still a significant river. So pretty much all the water that we drink, use, irrigate our fields with originates in these mountains in the southeast of the country. The water comes from the Atlantic Ocean, where the masses of air filled with water vapor, they move from the west to the east, and then they hit these big mountains, this West Tian Shan and Pamir Alai, and drop their water there. It's physics. You can look it up. They drop this water, and this water is collected in the big rivers, in Amu Darya, Sirdarya, and Zerafshan, and smaller rivers like Cherchik, Ugam, Pskem, and so on. And then it moves all the way to the west, to the Aral Sea, right? And of course, the amount of water that comes every year depends on the conditions in the Atlantic and general climate of the Earth. It doesn't depend on what's going on in the mountains of Tian Shan. So you can cut all the forests, the total amount of water will not change. What will change is the distribution of water over the seasons. Here is how it works. And by the way, the amount of water that we have is significant. I wouldn't say it's humongous, but it's very big. The total discharge of these three rivers is about 100 cubic kilometers of water a year. That's a big amount. That's as big as the River Nile. But River Nile supports 400 million people. Those three rivers support something in between 50 and 60 million people. So you can see how much room to improve exists now in order to use the rivers, this water more efficiently, okay? Now, what makes the forests that cover these mountains so important? Why do we have to care about these forests? Here's why. These forests basically create the soil that covers like a big spongy blanket all these slopes of the mountains. That soil. The soil is, as I said, is a huge sponge that can absorb an enormous amount of water. Absorb it, like the water that drops as a rain or snow into these mountains. So the soil absorbs this water and then slowly releases it through the groundwater and the surface water, the rivers that are flowing out, these Amu Darya and Sir Darya. And when the soil is intact, when the forests are healthy, this release is so slow that even the smaller rivers, even the smaller streams are flowing all the year. The flow is stable. If you cut the forests and the soil is whooshed away, and there is no soil, bare slopes, rock can't hold the water. So the mountain receives the rain drops, and very quickly goes downstream, and as catastrophic flood destroys the things downstream instead of feeding them. Of course, it's still feeding them like in Central Asia, but sooner or later you will have catastrophic floods if you cut the mountain forests. What do, the mountain forests? Okay, productivity. They provide organic matter for the soil and for the entire ecosystem. They constantly shed leaves, needles, twigs, all kinds of organic matter. Sometimes you can see that the trees are dying and then they fall on the ground and they feed the soil ecosystem, the soil microbes. The soil microbes are reworking, reprocessing this organic matter and make it available back to the plants. So the trees are growing more and bigger and richer and accumulate this organic matter, and then they shed it again. And this cycle of life is going on and on and on. And the whole ecosystem is becoming richer and richer and richer. That's the big function. This organic matter, by the way, is percolating downstream and feeding the ecosystems downstream as well. Now, the erosion. The slopes are very, very vulnerable to erosion, right? The soil is loose. So any rain wants to bring that soil particles downstream, downslope. The forest with this huge root system is holding together this soil. It's like a big fish net that is covering this blanket of soil and prevents the soil from going downstream. You can see this huge network of roots, and it's not just like a fish net that is on top of the soil. It's a 3D fish net that is permeating the soil, right? So it's a 3D network that is holding the soil together. And of course, as I said, when the soil is healthy, when the ecosystem is working like it's supposed to, then the soil is able to absorb any amount of water that comes to it. Billions of tons of water in the Uzbekistan's mountains that the soils in the mountains can absorb and then slowly release. Billions of tons, which is enough for any big rain. Once you remove that soil, your whole system of regulating water flow collapses. And now, of course, as being a biologist, I cannot miss the point that forests are huge focal points of biodiversity. They are home to 70% of all animals and plants on Earth. Over 100 species of plants and animals are being lost every day. Every day, as I speak, some species is gone forever. And when I say we're losing it, we're not losing them. We're killing them, because it's us who are destroying the habitat of this species. So it's pretty bad. Now, why do we do that? Why do we cut the forests? If we know how valuable they are, if we know how many functions and services they provide, why do we still cut them? Well, it's a simple graph. Look at this. The population of the Earth increased many, many times in the past 100 years. It used to be very small, and the Earth was able to sustain this relatively small population of several 100 million people. But now we are 8 billion people. And as the Americans say, they don't make any land anymore. So we're still sitting on the same land, on the same land mass, which is not very big. We're just using it much more intensively than before because there are many more of us, right? Many times more of us. It's a simple mathematics. We cannot keep using the land as our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers did the same way, simply because there are too many of us. If we keep using it the same way, the same sort of traditional way, we will degrade the land. We will lose that land. And you know, if we lose the soil, we're in big trouble. Why? Because 98% of the food that we eat derived from soil. 98%. We lose the soil, you can figure out how long we will live after that. Now, is it inevitable? Should we just say, okay, well, there's too many of us, we can't do anything? No, it's not inevitable. We can change the way we use the land. And we have to change the way we use the land because otherwise our future is pretty bleak. So it is in our hands. The future of the land here in Uzbekistan and more generally on Earth is in our hands. And it's our choice whether we will leave to our children our mountains looking like this, which is very quickly turning into a bare land, or looking like this, which is a healthy forested ecosystem in the mountains of Lashkarek, about two hours drive from Tashkent. It's a great forest. And we want most or all of our mountains to look more like this than the slide on the left. Now, is it doable? Can we do that? Maybe it's just a pipe dream. Maybe it's not possible. Because the forests are already gone. That's it? No, that's not it. I spent years restoring the forests in the mountains, and I know that it's quite doable. It's very possible. There's a very interesting avenue to make it happen. The ecologist who found out the principle of the tragedy of the commons, which states that every common resource will be destroyed sooner or later. The resource that is used by people as a community, not belonging to specific people, will be destroyed because it will be overused. It's always the case. He produced two possible solutions. One solution is to sell this land or this resource, if it's a pond or a pasture or a forest or a piece of the ocean, to private hands. So just privatize it. That's one possible solution. And it works, I should tell you. The other possible solution was the government regulation. Government just decrees that this resource should be used such and such, no more. Just basically limit the amount of use, limit the number of cattle that you can graze in this particular pasture, for example, right? That's the second way. But there's a third way, which is make it profitable for people living in the area to restore that forest. How do they do that? Well, one example is China, right? They just paying cash to the farmers to plant more trees. New and a very promising avenue is selling carbon credits. What's that? A lot of companies in the world are producing a fair amount or a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. They are releasing carbon dioxide. They are feeling bad about it. They're feeling that they're contributing to the climate change. But they can buy credits for carbon dioxide and sort of balance that against the carbon dioxide that they are producing into the atmosphere. Companies like power stations and smelters, big plants, right? A lot of industries are producing a lot of carbon dioxide. So they are buying carbon credits. What's carbon credit? Carbon credit is given to somebody or some company or some entity which is sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and burying it somewhere, usually into the soil. Like when you plant a forest and the forest is growing, it takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and buries it into the soil, A growing forest in Europe will bury something around 3 to 5 tons of carbon a year per hectare. Now, 1 ton of carbon was going for about 70 euros, give or take, 70, 80 euros. 1 hectare of your forest will consume several tons of carbon dioxide a year. So a farmer that planted the forest, planted, say, 1,000 hectares. And 1,000 hectares is not too much. It's like 3 by 3 kilometers. It's a big area, but not a huge area. He can get every year several 100,000 euros for this forest, and he doesn't have to do anything about that forest except keeping it alive, right? Not cutting it, and not allowing somebody else to cut it. So that forest can be more profitable than your pasture, your field, your grain, almost anything. That's, in fact, a great way to incentivize the people around the world to grow more forest, because these carbon credits cost a lot of money. Now, as I said, it's our job and it's in our hands to convert our mountains into something beautiful like this. Let's make the goal number 68 of the strategy Uzbekistan 2030 happen. Make it our future. Expand the forested area in Uzbekistan. Thank you very much.